I'm Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story. Tonight, we're going to talk about a relationship gone sour. We've probably all been through that at one time in our lives. It's no fun, and along the way, the breakup usually has some definite markers that show that things are only getting worse. Well, that's happening now in the relationship between Oregon's big cities and small towns. It's the urban-rural divide, and we could all be headed for a divorce. 11 counties in eastern Oregon have voted to start talking about becoming part of Idaho. Last night we explored some of the cultural differences in rural Oregon. Tonight we'll dig into that a bit deeper and see what, if anything, can be done to help turn things around. We're traveling to eastern Oregon, to Grant County and the town of John Day. One of the people we've come to visit is Sandy Gilson. She's a board member for the Greater Idaho movement. If there was a vote tomorrow to make Grant County part of Idaho, how would you vote?
To leave.
You'd become Idaho?
Yes.
Even though you're a fifth-generation Oregonian?
Yes.
Gilson grew up in a small town in southern Oregon. She moved to the John Day area 16 years ago and bought a company involved in the real estate business.
You know, Oregon when I was a child, was a great place. There was a lot of money for schools because most of it was timber money, and the timber taxes supported the schools and the counties and everything. This was a prosperous state at that time. And then we started getting into the spotted owl and all of the controversy with that.
In the late 1980s and early 90s, timber harvests did change. A 2017 report from a group called Headwater Economics noted that Grant County alone lost at least $30 million in timber earnings during the years 2001 through 2014. These days, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, the median household income in Grant County is $51,100 per year. As of 2021, Grant County had 7,272 people. It's 94% white. The median home price is $160,000. 90% have at least a high school degree. 17% have a bachelor's degree or above. Gilson said she loves her community. Her roots run deep in Oregon.
I'm a fifth-generation Oregonian. My great-great-grandfather was actually a miner out here in Grant County. He came through and did some mining, prospecting during the days that they were prospecting out in here, and then moved to Yam Hill area and settled there and started his family.
So you have deep roots.
Very deep roots.
But her small town lifestyle kept her from ever feeling connected to the west side of Oregon or its big cities.
I mean, I started driving when I was 5 years old because we were raised on a farm. I started working full-time in the hayfields when I was 8 for the The high school I went to closed if there was a major branding at one of the ranches because we all went to work. You know, hunting season shut down the school for a week. It's just a different lifestyle out here. Not bad or you know.
Not judging one that's better than the other, but
just different. We're a lot more self-reliant, able to take care of ourselves. You know, taught that we have to, because you drove out here today. I mean, how long did it take you? And it's 3 hours to the nearest Walmart from here.
On top of the cultural differences, Gilson has many more reasons she's helping lead the campaign to divorce the western side of Oregon. One, a typical complaint in rocky relationships: you never listen to me.
We never feel heard out here. You know, our idea of what makes us safe, the gun laws, the Measure 114, the gun storage laws, they don't make as much sense out here as they would in Portland. And we understand why they are needed for Portland, but you know, if I call the police in the middle of the night here, they may be 2 or 3 hours away before they get here. If I have something locked up with the trigger guard and in my safe and unloaded and follow all the rules, that person coming through the door is not going to wait for me to get that unlocked, and the police are hours away. So it's more about self-protection.
And I'm sure you and probably a lot of other folks out here voted no on 114.
Yes, very much so.
But it passed anyway.
It did. but it didn't pass from Eastern Oregon.
But does the fact that it did pass, is that another example to folks out here saying, see, no matter what we say, our voice is not heard and that West Side will is imposed on us?
Yes. Measure 110 was not passed out here. The marijuana laws and legalization was not passed out here, but they were passed in Portland and Eugene, and therefore we have to live under it. And it is a totally different lifestyle out here, and a different way of living and different value system.
Another sign a relationship is crumbling is when one side believes the other no longer has their best interest in mind. They lose trust in the relationship. They begin to watch for evidence to back up the feeling.
Good afternoon. The House will come to order.
I watched last year as Tina Kotek was the leader of the House, and she said, I am going to work with the Republicans to set up the new districts. And then it got time to do it, and she said, no, I don't think so. It would make me question whether it's possible. I mean, she had all right to do that. But it made us all feel like this side doesn't get listened to.
That actually happened in 2021, not last year. It came during congressional redistricting when voting boundaries were changed in Oregon, as they are every 10 years. But Sandy is correct. It did happen. More signs of a failing relationship, different values, and an imbalance in power.
You know, it's been 40 years since we've had a Republican government, you know, and there's been the feeling of it walking away from the values that we hold out here, the family values, the taking care of our neighbors and being able to care for ourselves. Those values seem to be pushed aside in the Oregon government, and more that the government's here to take care of you and tell you what to do, versus you get to live your life and the government's here to provide the services that are needed to support you in that.
Is there any chance of reconciliation in your mind? Is there anything the state could do that would make you change your mind?
Move your government out here and live here. See what it's like for us out here. But I don't think that there's the willingness to do that. I don't think we don't have delivery pizza. We don't have, you know, you have to be totally and completely self-sufficient out here. And a lot of people that live in the cities can't. It's a totally different lifestyle and a value system that's totally different.
The governor's talking about doing a listening tour. You think that would make any difference to you?
It would. We welcome the opportunity to speak with the governor. We would love to have an opportunity to sit down and speak with her like we are speaking now, and having a conversation that was equal give and take on both sides. Do I think it would change anything? No.
And it wouldn't make you feel heard?
No.
We decided to take a break and get some fresh air. Sandy showed me the woods across the street from her home, where deer often wander in the evening. We didn't see any, but it was a nice afternoon.
Sometimes the threat of a divorce is what gets two sides to stop and listen.
It is. You know, that is very true in marriage counseling and everything else.
Yeah.
But these two sides seem so polarized that something has to stop the polarization.
Yeah.
And the only way to do that is to talk and to sit down and really listen to each other.
Mm-hmm. You say these two sides, but you're one of the sides.
I am. But that doesn't mean that I don't care about the other side.
Mm-hmm. And you're ready to sit down and listen to them too?
Oh, sure.
But you really want them to listen to you as well.
Yes, very much so. You know, and we're not saying you need to change for us. We're saying let us go be ourselves.
So far, 11 counties in eastern Oregon have voted to start the process to move the state border and make them part of Idaho. This is a map showing generally where the new border would be. Back inside, the final act of a crumbling relationship. One side starts to court a new partner. I asked Sandy if it would matter if the state tried harder to limit the impact of statewide laws that may not fit well in rural Oregon.
Maybe, but I think Oregon has gone too far to where they can't come back. I don't think, and nor would I want them to. They have a right to live their life the way they want to live it. I'm just asking to live my life the way I want to live it under a government that I feel will allow that.
And you don't think the current government will?
No.
Why do you think Idaho would?
Idaho has more of the values we have. Idaho is more conservative, is more rural. We match Idaho better in just populations, county density, county areas, the type of industries that we have here. It's just a match in so many of those ways.
Now, some of you have asked why Sandy and the others don't just sell their homes and move to Idaho now. I asked that question. They say it's because they love the land where they live and they love their communities. They don't want to physically move, they just want things to change. But not everyone's ready to vote for Greater Idaho. Tomorrow night we'll visit with a brew pub owner as frustrated as anyone else, but unwilling to vote for Greater Idaho. We'll talk about why tomorrow night. And last night, we asked you for some of your thoughts on this whole thing, the urban-rural divide and the idea of Greater Idaho. Carol had a comment that several of you agreed with.
I think those Eastern Oregon folks should be allowed to divorce the western side. That's just my opinion. Thank you.
But much of the feedback we got sounded a lot like this from Ken.
I understand the difference between Eastern Oregon and Western Oregon. I live in Eastern Oregon. And but my opinion is this. If you don't like Oregon, move to Idaho. It's that simple.
Yep, heard that from a lot of folks. And we heard from a man named Gary who lives in John Day. He shared his thoughts on the Greater Idaho movement as someone who has lived in Grant County his whole life.
The people that think Boise, Idaho, one of the fastest growing cities in the United States, is going to pay any more attention to Grant County, Oregon than Salem does, I really think they've got another think coming.
And how about this comment talking about the wide disparity between the number of voters in eastern counties compared to those in the metro areas? ML writes, our system represents people, not acres, not ancestry, not traditions. Yes, everyone needs to understand each other better, but I don't see how moving borders solves anything, and I don't see why we think states should be culturally homogenous. There were also some good thoughts on potential solutions to help narrow the cultural rift between East and West. Here's a few examples. Many of you think it needs to start with political power in government. How can the East be more represented in Salem?
My concern is population versus acreage. What if we did our senators by acreage, not population, and our representatives at least by acreage, not population? Just an idea. That might be more fair. Because we are really not heard. We are probably more like Idaho.
Interesting idea. James says maybe we should change the way we divide state senators. Instead of districts, have it something like one per county. That would give a more fair representation to me and have both parties work together more.
Pat, the biggest problem in Oregon is them 3 counties run the state. Why don't we vote by county? That is a more political way to do what we need to do in Oregon. If we vote by county, everybody would get a share of saying what we have to say. So I think we ought to vote by county, Pat.
All right, thanks for that comment. A viewer named Matt suggested an electoral college system for Oregon counties to function like the one we currently have with the federal government. And Greg recommended a constitutional rewrite to create a lower house and an upper house in Salem, with the lower house having 1 or maybe 2 representatives from each county. The upper house would have senators chosen based on population so that more populous areas would have more senators. He goes on, this would give representation in one house that would be largely based on land area rather than population, and would mean that less populous areas of Oregon would control that house. And though most, if not all, of these next solutions seem a little bit far-fetched, that doesn't stop you from really thinking outside the box. And we appreciate and respect that. John says what they need to do is combine Washington and Oregon. West side of the Cascades, make it Washington, east side, Oregon.
I think a solution to keeping Oregon intact would be to move the capital from Salem to Burns, the physical center of the state. And even though most of the legislators live in the valley, they would have to spend all of the time that the legislature is in session in Central Oregon and could have more of a feel for the needs of the people from that part of the state.
And we'll end with two comments that we think are probably a bit more reasonable. Dennis says Governor Kotek should hire Drazen as an advisor on Eastern Oregon issues on her direct staff. An interpreter would be invaluable if she would consent to do this, if truly looking for bipartisan participation in resolving issues between East and West Oregon issues. And finally, this from Steve. When new laws come out that greatly affect the East, make exceptions for these counties. Thanks to all of you who commented. That's the kind of thing happening now in Salem, by the way, that bipartisan idea of pump your own gas. Well, that's a bill that we featured late last week as an example of the bill that sets different rules for the urban versus the rural counties. Many of you feel there should be more of that. You had a lot of great feedback. Thank you so much. In fact, it's so much that I cannot personally reply to a lot of the emails that are coming in right now. I try to, but I'm running out of time. So I'm sorry about that. But they do get read. Please keep them coming in. You know the drill. The email is thestory@kgw.com or call and leave a voicemail, 503-226-5090.
Up next on The Story, one issue that did not go over well in Eastern Oregon is Measure 114, the gun control law that would create a permitting process to buy a gun while also restricting the use of high-capacity magazines. The measure is on hold because of legal challenges, but there's a bill in Salem that looks awfully similar.
Constitutionality of the provisions of this measure have been challenged and are being challenged, and yet this bill will short-circuit that process.
Could this bill change anything while 114 continues its slog through the courts? And does it stand a chance? That's coming up next when The Story returns.
With Oregon's new gun control law, Measure 114, frozen by an Eastern Oregon court, lawmakers in Salem are now working on what appears to be a backup plan. Their new bill includes a permit, a requirement, and limits on magazine capacity, just like 114, and then it goes further. Evan Watson explains.
The debate is back. What should Oregon do about guns? And if it feels all too familiar to you, Republican State Senator Kim Thatcher would agree.
It is the season. It's that part of session. The gun control, or actually gun owner control, advocates are in full force. They basically say, in essence, we need these laws in the name of public health and safety. And the other side says these proposals will have little effect on public health and safety, but will make law-abiding citizens less safe.
In November, Oregon voters passed Measure 114, banning high-capacity magazine sales and creating a permitting and background check system to buy guns. Measure 114 is being contested in court. Now lawmakers are considering Senate Bill 348. It includes parts of Measure 114 and then adds more regulations. Senate Bill 348 would raise the minimum age to purchase a gun to 21, postpone the permit requirement until July of 2024, raise permit fees from $65 to $150, add gun safety course requirements, and allow more time for background checks and waiting periods for gun transfers. Thatcher and other critics say this bill could circumvent the legal challenges to Measure 114.
The constitutionality of the provisions of this measure have been challenged and are being challenged, and yet this bill will short-circuit that process.
This amendment goes beyond ballot measure 114's already unconstitutional requirements, like the increase in fees, time, delay, age restriction increases, and retroactive magazine bans.
Elizabeth Howe, a representative for Oregon Alliance for Gun Safety, said the bill would create a safer system of permits and background checks that gives police more money and structure to make it work.
The -1 amendment to Senate Bill 348 makes some important changes to aid in the implementation of the new permit system and ensures that law enforcement has the tools and resources they need to implement the measure.
Most of the speakers at Monday's public hearing opposed the bill.
These measures are disenfranchising Oregonians and making them feel as though they have no voice in their government. I pray that you will let Senate Bill 348 die.
And hundreds of people have submitted written testimony online, mostly in opposition.
I had a customer come into my store and she was scared. She had a threatening neighbor. Police couldn't do anything because they hadn't harmed anybody yet. With this bill going through, she'd have to wait days, and she didn't have days.
Evan Watson, KGW News.
The Senate Judiciary Committee is now accepting written testimony on the bill. They'll continue to do that through tomorrow night at 5 o'clock, and then it will hold a work session on Thursday. Many of the bill's supporters say there's more work to be done to clarify this proposal. Coming up next on The Story, help is coming for Chinook salmon here in Oregon, and it's coming in the form of the largest dam removal project in the country. The massive job got underway this month, and it's something that Native tribes have been calling on for decades. Up next, why power customers may not even notice when the dams go away. That's next, when The Story returns.
Coming up on KGW News at 6:30, hear from the neighbors about to have a city-sanctioned homeless camp just 10 feet from their home.
We feel miserable because of it. We had completely different vision for our old age to live in peace.
Now they're worried the place where they made 4 decades worth of memories will never be the same. Plus, why some campers in the area say they're being overlooked. That's next at 6:30. Hope to see you then.
we're going to unlock, you know, an amount of salmon habitat, high quality habitat that, like I mentioned, hasn't been available to these fish for over 100 years. And hopefully they're as excited as we are to get back in there.
It is exciting. The biggest dam removal project in America got underway last week. Construction crews in southern Oregon and northern California broke ground on a mammoth project to remove 4 dams on the Klamath River, some of which have stood for more than a century. And the removal could not come at a better time for the salmon, who've been struggling on the rivers for years. The dams themselves aren't really helping with irrigation or flood control, and they don't really produce that much electricity either. Pacific Corp owns the dams and says they only represent 2% of their overall power supply, which they say can be easily replaced. The dams do block hundreds of miles of prime salmon spawning habitat, though, and that's why native tribes have been pushing for them to come down for decades. A member of the Hoopa Valley tribe sits on the board of the Klamath River Renewal Corporation and said that native people see the land, the mountains, the rivers, and the animals who live there as an integral part of their religion.
When we talk about what does restoring this river system mean, it's basically the first phase of bringing back our religion to a healthy state and being able to have healthy people and live in balance.
Chinook salmon spawn in the Klamath. The species has been in dramatic declines because of drought and high water temperatures in the region, so much so that this year's spring Chinook fishing season was canceled for all of California and much of Oregon. But once these dams are down by the end of next year, roughly 400 miles of prime cold water salmon spawning habitat will reopen. Construction crews are just getting underway, building access roads and reinforcing bridges. The first dam is slated to come down this summer. And get this, tribal members and others have been collecting native seeds from the area to replant the more than 2,000 acres that will be uncovered when the reservoirs are drained. We're not talking about a few thousand seeds here, by the way. So far, they've collected 17 billion. Yes, that's with a B. All right, keep sending your questions and comments to thestory@kgw.com. We're going to wrap things up right after this. That's the end of our show. Thanks so much for watching. And remember, the story, our story, well, that never ends. I'll see you tomorrow night.